One ordinary morning, I settled into my chair, savoring the coffee my assistant had brought. She'd sweetened it again with artificial sugar. I always joked it would eventually push me to switch to black tea. But my thoughts drifted from the coffee to an urgent copyright issue that required immediate attention. As usual, the federal government had created yet another hurdle, holding back essential documents and dragging out the process. It seemed as though government employees had an unwritten rule: never make a decision unless absolutely necessary. Their inertia felt like an insurmountable wall. I couldn't help but picture the letter being shuffled from one desk to another, passing through countless hands before any real action began. Trapped in bureaucratic purgatory, I risked losing significant amounts if approval never came. Each additional layer of bureaucracy, every new office, pushed me further from the system. Just as I began to lose hope, my assistant, Victoria King, entered the office. "There's a young woman here to see you," she announced. The visitor had refused to give her name, leaving a photo instead. As soon as I looked at it, a chill swept over me. Why now? The photo was of me and my ex-wife Violeta on our wedding day, nearly 22 years ago. The image stirred painful memories of betrayal, heartbreak, and harsh truths that had defined my life since. Many thought I had isolated myself to heal, and in a way, they were right. Back then, I hadn't understood the subtleties of power or the influence of money, but life had taught me. Handing Victoria a USB drive in a plastic case, I said, "Ask her if she's Hazel or Addison Lewis. If she says yes, show her what's on this file. If she needs a copy, give her one, but keep the original. Once you're done, come back to me. I'll answer your questions." At 47, I appreciated the solitude bachelorhood afforded me. My brief but bitter marriage to Violeta Hill had robbed me of any trust I might have had. Now, trust had to be earned, and few managed that. With a sturdy build, I stayed in shape through regular evening workouts at the gym. Dark hair streaked with silver hinted at my age, though I still caught more than a few looks. Despite occasional connections, I'd firmly decided against serious relationships. Nearly an hour later, Victoria returned, leaving the door slightly ajar as she entered. She explained that the young woman still wanted answers. Sitting down, she looked me straight in the eye with her emerald green gaze full of determination. She wasn't leaving without answers. "Did you find out who she is?" I asked. "Yes, it's Addison," Victoria confirmed. "What brought her here and why is she so upset?" I continued. Victoria explained that Addison had broken down, saying, "We were deceived our whole lives. If my suspicions are right, he was deceived too." Addison turned out to be one of identical twins. The video Victoria had shown her contained her mother's final words to me, recorded shortly before our divorce proceedings, several months before the twins' birth. I hadn't known about her pregnancy, and only learned of the twins much later from mutual friends. Addison's grandfather, a former law enforcement officer, had orchestrated my dismissal from the FBI with false accusations solely because he despised me. The USB held hints of threats to my life if I attempted to interfere. He was ruthless and powerful. Violeta had left me for my former best friend, with whom she'd been having a secret affair. All signs pointed to him as the twins' biological father. "How did she find me? And what does she want?" I asked. Addison had come across an old photo of the two of us in the attic, with my name written on the back. Seeing my face in the photo, she tracked down my information through online searches, finding our marriage certificate and divorce records. In her search through social media, she finally located me. Desperate, she was looking for a suitable bone marrow donor for her twin sister, who had very little time left. "But I'm not their father," I said in astonishment. "There's no reason for her to come to me. Violeta was with their father long before me." Apparently, Addison had persuaded the doctors to conduct a DNA test alongside a bone marrow compatibility test, and the results confirmed her suspicions. Their father was not the biological parent. I froze, trying to absorb the revelation. Victoria's face softened, her eyes gleaming with understanding, and tears began to well up in mine. If Addison's theory was true, Violeta had lied to me all these years. I might actually be their father. I suspected she was related to you as soon as I saw her, Victoria said, rising with a gentle smile. She has your look, that undeniable, familiar look. Victoria, prepare yourself for a revelation that might be the most sensational in a decade. I need the data on this disc to reach my publishers. Make sure they release it while preserving my anonymity. My identity must remain hidden. My safety isn't guaranteed yet. Persuade them to expedite the release. After that, find someone who can quickly conduct a DNA test and book me an appointment. If it turns out that I am their father, I'll need undeniable proof before I approach their mother. If the results confirm my suspicions, I'll require a top-notch attorney to protect my rights as a parent. Clear my schedule. I need to get to Hazel in the hospital as soon as possible, and call Addison. I want to meet with her. Victoria nodded swiftly and said, Addison, you may come in. When Addison entered, I was stunned. She was the exact image of my younger sister in her youth. Emotions overwhelmed me, and we both teared up. Victoria discreetly took a few photos of this moment on her phone and left us alone. A while later, Victoria returned. The lab scheduled a blood test for you and Addison for 1 o'clock, promising prompt results. It's all paid for with the corporate card. At 4, you have a meeting with your sister Penelope. I reserved a private room. Addison needs to meet the family, and Penelope has already arranged childcare. She knew I had news that would shake up our entire family. As Addison drew closer, my thoughts became a whirlwind of questions and emotions. When she finally approached, I hugged her, and Victoria quietly closed the door, leaving us alone. The realization that this young woman could actually be my daughter was overwhelming. Addison looked equally stunned as we left the office, her hands trembling slightly. We exchanged brief phrases, both of us gradually processing everything that was happening. I arranged for the clinic to send the test results via email, and we went for a late lunch. I learned that Addison had driven all night, stopping only when necessary. It worried me, understanding the risk she took, but I held back, recognizing that my feelings stemmed from a deep, instinctive care. Her actions reminded me of my own impulsive decisions at her age. When we arrived at the restaurant, I noticed Penelope's car and turned to Addison. We're here to meet your sister, but why do you think Victoria organized all this without consulting us? Addison looked at me curiously. I added, Soon, you'll understand why there was an immediate connection between Victoria and me. You'll see why we believe you and Hazel might be my daughters. She looked at me, hope shining in her eyes. Can I call you Dad? I chuckled softly. I would be honored. As soon as we walked in, the hostess led us to a cozy booth. I ordered a bottle of champagne and some extra napkins, anticipating an emotional reunion. Penelope sat with her back to us, so I gestured to Addison to wait. I approached Penelope quietly and greeted her. Hey sis, thanks for coming. Penelope looked up, her face lighting up. You look different, happier. What's going on? I gestured for her to stand. There's someone I want you to meet. As Addison stepped closer, Penelope's face paled as she realized who was in front of her. Addison had the same high cheekbones, dark hair, and warm blue eyes. They looked like mirror images. Oh my God, Penelope whispered, stunned. Sam, you could have warned me. This is unbelievable. How long have you known? Addison, visibly emotional, replied, Just about 5 hours. I showed up at his office unexpectedly. Victoria and Dad recognized me immediately. Penelope nodded, wiping away tears. Now, looking at you, I understand why. The waitress quietly brought over napkins, sensing the importance of the moment. Penelope, still dabbing her eyes, asked the hostess to set up 3 more seats. She quickly called her husband, explaining it was a family matter, and reached out to our parents, insisting they come immediately. When our mom asked if everything was all right, Penelope simply said, You need to see this for yourself." The atmosphere was charged with emotions. At that moment, a notification arrived from Victoria. She announced that the publisher had officially released the news. By 7 o'clock, it would be available for everyone. We hadn't even taken the first sip of champagne when Penelope's husband entered, accompanied by my parents. My father's loud voice filled the room, cheerful but firm, as he demanded, "I hope it's good news." Penelope and I stood up to greet them. With obvious pride, she introduced Addison. "Mom, Dad, Lou, this is Addison Lewis, Violet's daughter." My mother immediately noticed the resemblance, her face lighting up with a joy she had longed for her whole life. Her eyes shone with pride. Finally, she had the granddaughter she'd always dreamed of. My father, usually quite talkative, was momentarily at a loss for words. After gathering himself, he finally said, "I can see it, though it's hard to take in fully." My mother sat down beside Addison, squeezing her hand tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. With a radiant smile, my father called for 2 more bottles of champagne. Once the glasses were filled, I stood to address everyone. "I want to tell you all a story," I began, as Addison captured the moment on my phone. I shared how we met and everything that had happened that day. When I finished, my father stood up, looking directly at Addison, and said, "Addison, we don't need DNA tests to see what our hearts already feel. Welcome to the family. You have 2 more aunts to meet. Promise me you'll always consider this family your own," he said. Taking her phone, Addison replied, "I came here searching for the truth, not knowing what I would find. Today has been a fateful day for both me and my father. Until this moment, we had no idea." Meeting Aunt Penelope introduced her to the power of unconditional love, adding that her twin sister Hazel would undoubtedly feel the same. I looked around the room and saw that everyone was deeply moved. Even my father, typically reserved, had tears in his eyes. My mother, holding up 2 fingers, allowed her tears to flow freely. I stopped the recording, capturing all those joyful tears. Addison saved Hazel's and her contact information in my phone, sending Hazel a video of the moment along with a message. "If this is true, a DNA test will confirm it. Watch the news at 7. With love, your twin sister." Admiringly, my mother asked if Addison needed any further proof. Addison showed her photos of herself and Hazel, and my mother immediately wanted copies to display on her laptop for everyone present. Addison turned off her phone and tucked it away, and then I realized that no one knew exactly where she was. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Hazel. I excused myself to answer, and my father, noticing the emotion on my face, raised an eyebrow questioningly. Addison mouthed, "It's my sister," and he nodded in understanding. I picked up the call. "Hello, this is Hazel. After watching the video, I had to call," she began. She explained that her mother wouldn't be back until 8 since she had stopped by the police station to inquire about Addison. Hazel said she was pretending to know nothing, although the police had left her a business card. "What should I do?" she asked. I replied, "Have him watch the news at 7 and pay close attention. When your parents aren't around, explain everything to him and show him the video. Give him my number and ask him to text first before calling. He'll understand after watching the news. When we confirm the DNA match, Addison and I might come with the entire family to meet you," I added. Hazel was surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked. I explained, "Addison has done so much to make this happen. The family won't stay on the sidelines. I don't know who exactly, but everyone who can make it will be there." "Why?" Hazel asked uncertainly. "For the sake of family," I replied simply. "In this family, kinship means everything. And if it's not me, someone else will be there for you." "Just like that?" Hazel's hesitation was clear. "Without a doubt," I said with a smile. "We may be strangers, but we're family." We exchanged a few more words before parting. Her departure was marked by a mix of relief and emotional tears. After ordering dinner, I sat down with my family to explain the reason for Addison's visit. Phones instantly came to life. Calls began to spread the news and gather everyone who could help. My mother took the lead in organizing our response. "How did you get here, Addison?" my father asked. Laughing, she replied, "I drove in my old car. It's literally falling apart as I drive." She smiled and added, "I parked it in Dad's lot." My father turned to me and said, "Son, first thing tomorrow, take that van to my dealership. She won't have to leave in that. It's a miracle she even made it here." He shook his head, then with a smile added, "She's got the same determination you had at her age. I like that." "What are you planning to give her?" I asked. "She can choose whatever she wants," he replied with a sly wink. Addison's eyes sparkled. "If I could choose, I'd pick an SUV. I love nature," she said enthusiastically. My father smiled, knowing how much our family loves outdoor adventures. Whenever possible, we would go fishing, hiking, or hunting. Dad started telling a story about how he taught me barefoot water skiing one summer. His voice animated as he captured everyone's attention. He and Mom insisted Addison stay with them for the night, certain she shouldn't be alone. After dinner, Dad escorted Addison to her van and then drove it to our house himself. Mom was thrilled, already planning how she'd spoil her new granddaughter. Dad stayed up late, waiting for Addison to arrive safely, around 1 in the morning. Then, at 10 in the evening, I received a call from a police investigator who had just spent 2 hours checking my background. By then, the media had started to show interest in the details I'd already shared. We discussed the situation, delving into its core. A video with 3 generations together helped answer some of his questions. I explained that we were rushing to complete DNA tests to confirm my connection to Addison, who would stay with my parents. Once confirmed, we'd see if I could serve as a donor for Hazel. I asked the investigator to keep this information confidential for now and promised to keep him updated. Later, Hazel told me he'd informed her of our conversation. Once again, I faced my past, but this time with a renewed sense of determination. I was no longer intimidated by money or my ex-wife's family's influence. I was prepared to lean on the media, the legal system, and most of all, the truth. I had resources, solid evidence, and unwavering resolve. My goal was not revenge. I sought justice founded on honesty. I was ready to face her family, and if necessary, even the federal government. At dawn the next day, I was already in the office, planning my schedule to align with my goals, and assigned Victoria to handle some duties during my absence. Victoria kept a close eye on my correspondence, asking questions about my plans and noting every detail. Her presence always brought me peace. Her beauty remained unchanged. Natural chestnut hair framed her face gently, her emerald eyes and full lips drawing attention effortlessly. I often found myself admiring her, silently grateful that she seemed unaware of it. Finally, Victoria received the DNA results, printed them out, and exclaimed, "It's official! You're her father!" She immediately called the lab to send the results to Hazel's doctor. Then she set about finding the toughest attorney in the state. After reviewing several candidates, she selected one and arranged a Skype call. The attorney agreed to take the case on a contingency fee basis, confident that proof of paternity would simplify matters. We planned to file a suit against my ex-wife, her husband, and her parents for violating my parental rights. The restraining order that was used against me would be overturned, exposing the deliberate steps they had taken. And even if we couldn't prove the existence of an alleged contract on my life, it would serve as evidence of their attempts at intimidation and control. The lawyer quickly recognized an opportunity for a major case without waiting for government agencies to get involved. I asked Victoria to retrieve an old, dust-covered gray box from the safe and send it to my new lawyer. Inside were documents showing that Violeta's father had been trying to ruin my career and marriage for years. Gathering this evidence had been a massive undertaking, requiring the navigation of countless bureaucratic obstacles. Later, I learned that one of the police officers leaked a video, turning the story into a tale of a runaway daughter reconnecting with her biological father to save her sister's life, a story that quickly captured the media's attention. "Mom, it's true," I said over the phone, feeling the full weight of the news. I'm officially a father of 2, thank God. I reminded her to be ready at 8 in the morning at the parking lot. I'll let everyone know. Have you spoken to the girls? She asked. By then, we were already on the road in a new SUV, packed to the brim. Addison and I led the convoy, followed by my parents in a tour bus, with another 10 cars trailing behind. Then a call came through. Addison answered and put it on speaker. CNN is following your story, Hazel said after a brief greeting. We have DNA confirmation. He's our father. Addison smiled. Dad always said that family would eventually come forward if it was real. I just didn't expect anything like this. Hazel's voice sounded joyful. This gave me a hope I didn't even know I was missing. It's been so many years since I felt this happy. News about our family is spreading, and now everyone is reaching out. Early in the morning, I met so many relatives. First, second, and even third cousins. Remembering all their names was quite a feat, but Addison was thrilled. Honestly, I'm thinking of changing my last name to Robinson, she said. I never knew families like this existed. I was overwhelmed with emotion and struggled to keep my hands steady on the wheel. At that moment, I realized this experience had to become part of my next book. My daughters were still talking about their meeting with Addison when Hazel said goodbye. Her mother had just entered the room. Dad, are you okay? Addison asked, noticing my emotions. How do you think I feel? I replied, trying to hold back my emotions. I just found out I have 2 daughters who grew up with my ex-wife and an old friend, and I knew nothing about it. One is full of life and energy. The other clings to life. One is incredibly independent, ready to face any challenge, just like me, and she wants to take my last name. I was filled with a profound, powerful pride. Addison, moved, said, I was so focused on saving my sister's life that I didn't think about how all this would affect you. I wasn't a match as a donor because I inherited a faulty gene from our mother. This emotional whirlwind I've stirred up will take time to settle. Can you forgive me? Forgive you for coming into my life and completely changing it? I paused for a moment. No, that's the whole point of life. You gave each of us another close person to love. You gave me the chance to finally be a father. Tears welled up as I spoke. Your grandparents adore you, I continued. Mom sees herself in you and feels enormous pride. You and your sister are now her favorite granddaughters, and she's pouring all her love over us. My sisters, Penelope and the others, will be telling this story for weeks. When they're done, it'll become a family legend, retold at every gathering for years to come. We learned that as soon as Violeta saw the live stream of our arrival, she had a severe panic attack. The walls she had built around herself finally began to crumble, brick by brick. When Hazel turned off her phone, a new resolve ignited within her. Mom, she began, her voice steady but filled with restrained tension. Why did you hide the truth about my real father from me? A heavy silence settled between them, but Hazel was determined not to back down. You took it upon yourself to steer our lives in a direction you had no right to, she continued, holding back her anger. Who gave you the right to make those decisions? She demanded sharply. Even Dad didn't know. If it weren't for Addison, who uncovered the truth and revealed it to me, would you have let me live in ignorance even in the face of death? Violeta said nothing. She had not anticipated such a confrontation. Her own father had despised Samuel from the very start, and had carefully ensured that he stayed out of their lives. At that moment, Hazel's doctor entered the room. We have confirmed that the DNA of the anonymous donor matches Hazel's biological father. He has agreed to undergo compatibility tests, and there is a high probability that he will be suitable for a bone marrow transplant, the doctor explained. He'll arrive tomorrow afternoon under security. With that, the doctor exited. Turning back to her mother, Hazel continued, So, my biological father is coming here, along with 30 other potential donors in case he's not a match. He's risking everything to give me a real chance, she said quietly but confidently. Why? Violeta whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief and confusion. Hazel stared at her mother intently. Because to him, family is everything. Even though we don't know each other, I am still his flesh and blood, and that matters to him, she replied. Watch this video. It will explain everything. As the video started, Violeta watched Addison reunite with her father's family. The resemblance between them was undeniable, a bond spanning 3 generations. The truth that her daughters now knew left no room for denial. The choices she and her husband had made were unraveling before her eyes. At that moment, a man entered Hazel's hospital room and approached Violeta. Introducing himself, he handed her a substantial envelope. "You're being served," he said before leaving. The weight of the situation crashed down on her, her knees buckling as tears began streaming down her cheeks. Hazel looked at her mother, her expression a mixture of anger and pain. "Mom," she said coldly, "did Grandpa really order my biological father's murder?" Meanwhile, Owen Torres had just finished a corporate meeting and was walking down the corridor when he too was served with legal documents. Taking a seat in the lobby, he opened them. The first set was a lawsuit against him and Violeta, accusing them of illegally stripping Samuel of his parental rights. The second set contained charges against Owen and Violeta's father, alleging they had conspired to ruin Samuel's career and marriage. But Samuel sought more than recognition. He was fighting for full custody of his daughters. In his claim, he asserted that if it weren't for Addison's intervention, he might never have known of his daughter's existence. He alleged they had shown moral neglect toward Hazel, suggesting they would have let her condition worsen rather than face the truth. With the story already attracting media attention, a straightforward legal defense seemed nearly impossible. Owen's mind drifted back to their college days, when he and Samuel had been roommates, football teammates, and rivals for Violeta's affection. Samuel had won her heart, and Owen had even served as his best man. However, Violeta's father had disapproved of Samuel's background and encouraged Owen to vie for her attention. With his influence, Samuel was kept constantly occupied with FBI assignments, leaving Violeta and Owen alone together. Eventually, during one of Samuel's 2-month assignments, Owen and Violeta crossed the line. When Samuel returned, Violeta's father confronted him with evidence of the infidelity, and Samuel, devastated, filed for divorce. Violeta, believing her delayed cycle was due to stress, hadn't known she was pregnant. However, her father saw this as the perfect opportunity to sever her connection with Samuel entirely. When the twins were born, he used fabricated accusations to secure Samuel's dismissal, ensuring his distance. It took Samuel 3 years to clear his name, during which he left town in disgrace. Violeta and Owen married. If the unedited records were exposed, they would prove the conspiracy Violeta, her father, and Owen orchestrated to destroy her marriage to Samuel. Now, Owen could only wonder how Violeta would react as these buried truths began to surface. Around 8 in the evening, after an exhausting 16-hour journey, Addison, our group, and I finally reached the final stop for the day. Although the journey was nearly over, unanswered questions lingered, far from resolution. We ordered a light snack, which was brought to our rooms, and shortly after that we drifted into a deep sleep until the alarm woke us at 6 a.m. Addison, and I left the hotel early because I had a confidential meeting with a police officer and an FBI agent. The others departed at 8 a.m. for our next destination. Addison dropped me off at the police station, where I met with Detective Peter Rogers and FBI agent Chad Giroux. We spent over an hour and a half discussing the interrogation of my former father-in-law. I provided them with my attorney's contact information and handed over a flash drive containing the gathered evidence. They placed me under official protection during my stay in the city. Accompanied by security, I went to the hospital to give a blood sample and determine if I was a potential bone marrow donor. Approaching Hazel's room, I heard Addison talking to her. The hospital staff recognized me as an author, and one of the nurses asked for my autograph, which I gladly gave. When I entered Hazel's room, Addison looked up, surprised. Dad, I didn't expect you this early, she said. Turning to Hazel, she introduced me. This is our dad, Samuel Robinson. Hazel looked fragile, her skin pale and sagging, her face bearing signs of nearing the end. Despite this, her face lit up with a broad smile, and her eyes filled with hope. Hazel, I said, the test results will be ready soon. We'll have an answer in about 30 minutes. The rest of the family is on the way, and my parents are also giving blood as we speak. If more than one of us is a match, I added, struggling to keep my emotions in check, the doctors plan to perform a dual transplant, using both arms simultaneously. Hazel couldn't hold back her tears, and I sat on the bed next to her, embracing her until she calmed down. Addison captured a photo of the two of us, both crying with joy and relief. She looked proud, and it was for a good reason. Seeing my two daughters together for the first time, I felt a rush of emotions, realizing Addison had done everything possible to make this reunion happen. Grandma, Grandpa, come meet my sister, Addison called. The five of us spent over an hour talking until Dr. Hazel came in, smiling. It turned out that both my mother and I were perfect matches for Hazel. Dr. Proctor asked if we were ready to register for the surgery at 5 a.m. the following morning. We agreed immediately. My father leaned in and whispered, "Thank God. We prayed for a miracle the entire way here." Hazel looked worriedly at the doctor. "Don't you need my parents' consent?" "Normally, yes," Dr. Proctor replied. "But this morning, at Mr. Robinson's request, a court order was issued. This allows us to proceed if he or one of his relatives is a match. The judge agreed that your mother and her husband aren't prioritizing your well-being." Dr. Proctor added that Mr. Robinson would cover all expenses not included in insurance. Addison smiled with pride. "No surprise, sister. After everything Mom and Owen have done, Dad had no other choice. He had no legal rights, so we used the courts to prevent delays." At that moment, the security guard informed us that we would soon be on the national news. Hazel turned on the TV to CNN, where they revealed my identity as a best-selling author valued at about $50 million. Addison, Hazel, and even the doctor were visibly stunned. My parents looked at me in complete amazement. They only knew me as a corporate financial consultant. "Oh my God, Dad," Hazel said. "I've read all your books. They're incredible." I laughed, remembering how, after my previous life had fallen apart, writing had become my refuge and therapy. The success of the first book marked a turning point, and the series had expanded ever since. I continued keeping it relevant, tackling harsh truths about global issues, societal biases, and moral dilemmas, whether people liked it or not. For the first time in 17 years, I found myself in a hospital, along with my mother. Hazel wanted to share a room with me, but hospital security couldn't allow it. Addison spent the evening moving between 3 different rooms, while my father called relatives, sharing the news. When Violeta and Owen arrived after work, their displeasure was evident. We responded to their cold attitude with indifference. Hazel informed them that she would be preparing for a dual bone marrow transplant the next morning thanks to the court order. "How is that possible?" Violeta asked. "Mom, my biological father and his mother are perfect donors," Hazel explained calmly. Hazel looked up with relief, her voice confident as she said, "They're both helping so I can get a double dose. This will give me the best chance for a full recovery." Then she turned to her mother. "Mom, do you know who Luke Clark is? He's actually your favorite author. His real name is Samuel Earl Robinson, and he's also my biological father." Violet and Owen's faces turned pale with shock. They both had hoped that the legal matters involving Samuel would settle quietly, but it was clear that wealth wasn't his motivation. Samuel sought justice, driven by a deep-rooted sense of law and order that had defined his career until it led to his dismissal. "Mom," Hazel continued, casting a sharp look at her, "Grandpa's been held by the FBI all day. You should check with Grandma to see if he's been released." "Can you explain why all this is happening?" Hazel pressed with a gleam in her eyes. "Addison and I want answers," she added. "Addison's here somewhere in the hospital. Maybe in Dad's room or with Grandma if you want to find her." Hazel and Addison were discussing Addison's plan to talk with her mother when Violet found them. At that moment, a security guard knocked and peered into the room. "Mr. Robinson, are you acquainted with Victoria King?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. The guard opened the door, admitting Victoria, my loyal friend of 12 years. I had supported her through her divorce after her husband had cheated on her with his assistant. Now, at 40, Victoria was adjusting to life as a single mother, though she still wore her wedding ring. My family and I cherished her, and I often wondered why she hadn't found someone new yet. "What brings you here?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She smiled and replied, "As always, to look after you. Dr. Proctor said you'll need to stay here a few days, and there's even a chance that I'm a compatible donor," she explained. "You'll need about a week for your arm to heal before you can start physical activity." She had already rented a private jet and booked a hotel room using the corporate card. Just then, I received a message from Addison on my phone. "Dad, she loves you, Toe." She always found a way to be there. With a playful raise of my eyebrow, I looked at her. The guard returned, this time saying, "Violet and Owen Lewis are here to see you. Shall I let them in?" "Only after a security check," Victoria declared firmly. The guard looked at her, puzzled. "And who are you to Mr. Robinson?" he asked. "I'm his fiancée. Didn't you notice the ring?" Victoria responded, showing her hand. Addison glanced at me with a playful smile, mouthing, "I told you so." I chuckled as Violet and Owen entered. Addison turned to me and said, "Dad, don't trust them. They're here only to protect themselves." "Addison, you don't even know half of it," Victoria interjected. "Your father's lawyer found a video of your stepfather accepting a check from your grandfather. It was a payment aimed at destroying your parents' marriage. If he succeeded, he would gain control over your grandparents' finances and an annual percentage." "How can you be sure that's true?" Violet asked cautiously. "And who even are you?" "Mom," Addison responded firmly. "This is Victoria, Dad's fiancée and a brilliant investigator. I trust her more than I trust you." Violet's face went pale. She realized her daughters were slipping away, and she felt powerless to stop it. "Violet, she's telling the truth," I confirmed. "I instructed my lawyer to hand all records over to the FBI, along with a letter from your father admitting he paid for those records. His resentment toward me was so intense that he was willing to go to any lengths, or use anyone, to see me fail." Violet turned to Owen, searching his face, and in his expression she found confirmation. At that moment, she realized the loss of someone who had once truly loved her. She looked at Victoria and quietly advised, "Don't let anyone control you the way I was controlled." Then, turning to me, she added, "Samuel, I need to speak with you alone after the surgery. For now, I need time to think." She glanced at Addison. "Will you walk me to the car?" Addison nodded. "I'll be back soon," she told us, leaving the room with her mother. "Mom and I need to talk." As they were about to leave, I turned to Victoria and quietly said, "Take care of Dad while I'm gone." We silently watched them walk away. The moment Violet crossed the threshold, tears filled her eyes. It was clear to Victoria and me that she hadn't fully grasped the weight of the situation until now. Owen, who had grown up carefree, was now paralyzed by fear, trapped in emotions he couldn't escape. Now that the truth was out, their lives lay in ruins. Violet would never forgive him. "Samuel," Owen began, his voice trembling, "I've dreaded this moment my whole life. I thought maybe it would never come. If we had met under different circumstances, I could have ignored it," he admitted. "I never imagined it would go this far. It's better to leave things as they are," he finished, before turning away, leaving us behind. I looked at Victoria, whose face reddened when our eyes met. Perhaps it was because, for the first time, my gaze conveyed something more than friendship. It conveyed longing. For the first time, I let my guard down. Could she be genuine? Is she finally opening up? Is this just friendship or something deeper? Either way, my daughters had awakened something new in me. I realized how much I had been living through others, finding joy in their lives instead of creating my own. Victoria, we have a lot to talk about while I recover, I said quietly. These past few days have been truly eye-opening. I've been passive, sitting on the sidelines instead of getting into the game. After my divorce, Samuel, you took on the responsibility, she replied. My kids were still young, and you became more to them than their own father ever was. You were always there, at their games, their dance recitals. You never missed a significant moment. I know why you're so generous. You want the children you care for to always feel protected, Victoria continued. On birthdays, you make them feel like royalty, and during summer vacations, you create unforgettable trips, filling their lives with cherished memories. You answer their questions like a father. They adore you, and you adore them, but you're afraid of commitment. I wanted to respond, but her words hurt me as deeply as Addison's did. I sat down beside her, gently took her hand and looked into her face, trying to understand my feelings. Violet betrayed me. Her father's influence always loomed over me. My closest friend turned against me. I lived under constant tension, always on guard, I confessed. Until now, I hadn't realized how fear had held me back. Victoria, how about we finally go on a real date? Or have I already missed my chance? I asked hopefully. About time, you stubborn man, she laughed, leaning in to kiss me. I'll message the kids to let them know we're together and figuring things out between us. Confident, aren't you? I teased her. I sent Addison a short message, thanking her and asking how she was doing. She replied that her mom didn't know about our relationship and took it hard. She wouldn't be coming home tonight. I asked Victoria to inform Hazel, and together we headed to her room. Introducing Victoria as my girlfriend, we explained everything that had happened and shared Addison's message. As we finished, my sister Penelope walked into the room. I just had to meet her, she said with a big smile. Victoria, what brought you here? She asked. I almost answered, but Penelope figured it out herself. He finally made a move, huh? She laughed. It took him long enough. I introduced Hazel to Penelope, adding, and the person who's about to come in is your Uncle Lou, Penelope's husband. You'll see that in our family, we say what's on our minds, even if others don't want to hear it. Excusing myself for a moment, I went to the nurse's station and messaged Addison to confirm Hazel's pizza preferences. She replied that Hazel liked everything except anchovies. I ordered 3 large pizzas and 3 2-liter bottles of soda, arranging for a quick delivery so everyone could enjoy the meal together. I called my father and asked him to bring Mom upstairs in about 30 minutes for a small pizza party. We ended up breaking the no food 8 hours before surgery rule, but were too caught up in celebrating. Even the head nurse, who came by to quiet us down, left with a slice of pizza. Later, she pulled me aside in the hallway and said, "You have no idea how much your joy has lifted everyone's spirits on this floor. Thank you." At 5 in the morning, Mom and I were taken to the preoperative area, and we tried to support each other while waiting to be taken in for surgery. I didn't fall asleep until the anesthesia took effect. When I opened my eyes again, the surgery was over, and all that remained was to wait and hope for the best. Dr. Proctor told us that the bone marrow transplant had been successful, but it would take several hours to be sure the graft had taken. Thankfully, it did. With relief, most of the family began considering heading home. "You are the worst patient I've ever met," joked Victoria. I feigned indignation, replying, "But I'm not even sick." "You're definitely a bull in a china shop," she teased with a grin. "Always impatient, difficult, and utterly unstoppable. Keep it up and people will start talking." Then she told me that Mom was recovering well, and reassured by my progress, she handed back my phone. The first messages were from Victoria's kids. "When is she getting her engagement ring, Dad? And when do we get to meet our new sisters?" "Victoria, your kids are too perceptive," I laughed, showing her the messages. I explained to them that I would be heading home soon to settle some things. Once they learned about the surgery, they wanted to know the whole story, and nothing surprised them. "Mom, Victoria read a message with teary eyes. They wrote, "He's always treated us like his own. Most of our friends dream of a dad like him. He's always been our dad to us." I smiled and replied, "Looks like we won't have a long engagement." I asked about the twins. "Have you heard anything from them?" "Addison is with Mom at Hazel's. She's recovering well and, despite the meds, already full of questions," Victoria replied, adding that Addison had mentioned our little pizza party. Hazel was still processing her resemblance to her aunt and grandmother. She was thrilled at the thought of planning a bridal shower as soon as she felt better. "Someone bring me some pants. I need to visit her and check on Mom," I said. The nurses tried to stop me, warning that it was still too early after surgery, but I insisted. Victoria and I went together, and I was surprised at how tolerable the pain was. We immediately noticed Hazel's improvement. Her complexion looked healthier, and her eyes sparkled, almost bringing tears to my own. Suddenly Addison asked, "Who are Tammy and Timothy King?" "They're my kids." "Why?" Victoria responded, surprised. "They sent me a friend request on Facebook this morning, and Hazel got one too," Addison explained. "Look at this," I said, handing the phone to Addison. She read the message, smiled, and passed the phone to Hazel. "I'll need it later to save their numbers," I joked. At that moment, Violeta came over and asked to speak privately, and we stepped into the waiting room. "Samuel," she began, "Mom and I talked for a long time last night. She acknowledged that Dad's resentment toward you was evident, but she never expected it to go this far. My daughters want to stay here until the end of the school year and then live with you permanently. They want to change their last name to yours. They believe what Owen and I did is unforgivable. They're ready to take it to court if I say no. They don't trust me, and I understand that. Will you take them? You know my family. They would never allow me to refuse, even if I wanted to." I nodded and reassured her. "I'll gladly take them in. We'll just need a bigger house to make sure there's space for everyone. If you agree to joint custody, I'll withdraw my claim against you, though I still intend to pursue it against the rest of your family. The twins are old enough to decide for themselves." Violette nodded, agreeing to joint custody. I offered to cover the cost of the name change, but she declined. Together, we returned to Hazel's room, where the girls were waiting, watching us closely. "Looks like we'll need a house with at least 6 bedrooms, Victoria," I remarked. Victoria's face lit up with a smile, and the girls squealed with excitement. Violette looked at them and said, "Girls, your father and I have reached an agreement. If Victoria agrees, what you've been dreaming of will soon come true. Tomorrow, I'll contact a lawyer to start the paperwork for the name change." "Samuel," Victoria said, looking at me with a smile, "are you sure you're ready for this? A house full of teenagers?" "Can anyone ever really be ready for that?" I replied with a grin. "But we'll manage. It still hasn't fully sunk in that I'll have 2 more children carrying my last name." "In fact, consider it 4, she corrected. "Tammy and Timothy also want you to adopt them. They've already started using the Robinson name." "Let's contact Roger Mauser's firm to begin the adoption paperwork," she added. "And then we'll write to the kids and start looking at neighborhoods with the best schools for our new home." Addison took out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and put the call on speaker. "Hello?" Tammy's voice sounded. "Who is this and what do you want?" "Hi, it's Addison, your future big sister. Is Timothy there?" Addison replied. "Prove it," Tammy demanded. "Dad taught us not to answer unknown numbers without confirmation. Are you trying to trick me?" "Tammy, it's Victoria," she intervened. "You're talking to Samuel's daughter, Addison. Soon we'll all be Robinsons. Hazel and I are changing our last names, and your dad has already started the adoption process for you and Timothy." "Finally!" Tammy laughed. "Tell Dad it's about time." "How's Hazel doing?" Timothy asked, clearly eager for news. "We're waiting to hear." Victoria and I exchanged glances, feeling the warmth of family in this moment. She gently squeezed my hand in support. "I'm already feeling better," Hazel chimed in, joining the conversation. "So far, things are going well. I'll send both of you my number so you can save it. Hazel, Addison, to us, your dad has always been our only father, Tammy continued. Our biological father wasn't in our lives, and your dad was better than any parent our friends had. Mom has loved him for years, and when we all meet, I hope you'll treat us as siblings, simply and without complication. Timothy and I will do everything to ensure nothing stands in the way. Both of my daughters nodded, showing their agreement. Tears shone in Victoria's eyes, and she quietly whispered, "They're showing how deeply they've absorbed your values. You have every reason to be proud." And I was proud. We ended the call and set off to visit my mother. When we arrived, my father was there as well, both of them surprised to see us together. Victoria looked at my father with an expression that made him smile, sensing an important conversation was ahead. "Mom," I greeted her, "you look wonderful. Have you seen Hazel recently? She's doing better. She really does look healthier, and her spirits have lifted, but it's still too early to draw conclusions," I replied. "But if you have a few minutes, we need to discuss something important." "We're listening. Go ahead," my father replied. "After this school year," I began, "Hazel and Addison will be moving in with me." I suggested that the twins take my last name, and Violeta agreed to both shared custody and the name change. Interestingly, the twins themselves were the first to propose this idea. "This is wonderful news!" my parents exclaimed in unison, clearly delighted. But Victoria didn't stop there. "Your son has finally decided to make an honest woman of me," she teased, giving me a playful smile. "Elizabeth, are you ready to start planning the wedding?" Tears welled up in my mother's eyes, and my father's face lit up with pride. His approval was silent but evident. I also announced that I'm planning to adopt Tammy and Timothy, and they will officially take my last name as well. "And as soon as we return, Victoria and I plan to start looking for a house," I added. My father laughed warmly. "What finally woke you up?" he asked, clearly amused. "Everyone has long seen how you feel about each other. I was about to ask your mother's permission to knock some sense into you myself." "Earl Robinson, behave yourself," my mother smiled, then turned to Victoria. "What are your thoughts on the wedding?" "We haven't discussed the details yet," Victoria said, "but since we're uniting 3 families at once, I'd like it to be a family affair. My maid of honor will, of course, be Penelope." "These past few days have taught me a lot," I said, squeezing Victoria's hand. Exhausted, I returned to my room and quickly fell into a deep sleep, while Victoria stayed beside me, catching up on the evening news. And it was then that we heard that Christopher Hill and Owen Lewis had been arrested for providing false information to the FBI. The person behind the attempt on my life had also come forward as a government witness. The news reported my dismissal from the FBI, which had prompted an internal investigation. When I woke up, Victoria filled me in on the details. Dr. Proctor stopped by and confirmed that my mother and I would be discharged the next day. "There will be follow-up exams, and don't forget to get your stitches removed on time," he reminded me. Hazel was showing positive signs of recovery, but the real test would come when her medication started to be gradually reduced. My parents decided to stay in town until Hazel was stable, and were planning to fly with us on a private jet. My father booked a room at Victoria's hotel, and we arranged for the bus driver to return home. In the following days, the media dissected every level of betrayal, manipulation, and political intrigue that had destroyed my marriage and career. Hours of airtime were devoted to how Violeta's father distorted facts to sow distrust between us. Violeta's election choices faced heavy public criticism. Before our departure, Victoria and I visited Hazel one last time. Dr. Proctor assured us that her recovery was progressing steadily. At the same time, public criticism of the government's handling of my case intensified in the media. Coincidentally, a long-awaited clearance for publication was suddenly approved for me and the publisher, and over 1 million copies of the book were set to be released in 2 weeks. 2 copies arrived that morning, and after I signed them, Victoria carefully wrapped them and we put them in a package for safekeeping. When we entered Hazel's room, we made sure Addison was with us too. "Your father and I have chosen the first weekend in August for the wedding," Victoria announced joyfully. "Aunt Penelope will be my maid of honor, and I'd love it if you both could be my bridesmaids," she added, looking warmly at Hazel and Addison. Hazel's face lit up, and she quickly replied, "Of course I'd love to." "Victoria, I'll never forget my first visit to Dad's office. I was so nervous, but you recognized me immediately and said, 'You must be Violet's daughter. So, how do we go about this?' That completely took me by surprise, but from that moment on, you accepted me," she recounted with a warm smile. "I'll be delighted to be a part of your wedding, but only if I can start calling you Mom," Hazel added, her eyes shining with joy. They embraced tightly, and I smiled as I watched Hazel jump out of bed, radiating happiness. When everyone settled down again, I pulled out a gift, a signed first edition of my latest book. I handed it to Hazel, inscribed with, "To one of the two most remarkable ladies who call me Dad, with love, Luke Clark or Samuel Earl Robinson." Hazel's face brightened as she unwrapped the book. This book, over 700 pages long, was my most extensive work to date, and Hazel was thrilled to have a copy before its official release. She opened the cover, saw my message, and was deeply moved. "Dad, you've already done so much. You didn't have to do this," she whispered, her voice trembling as she hugged me tightly. With tears in her eyes, Hazel continued, "Before you came into my life, the doctors didn't think I had much time left. Addison knew about it too. I don't know what led her to the attic, but it brought us to you." She hugged me tightly while Addison smiled, watching us. Addison began, "Dad, I have to tell you, Dr. Proctor believes that if Hazel had only had a single transplant, her body might not have recovered as well. The double transplant seemed to give her body the strength to heal," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I didn't know if you'd be there with us, but you never hesitated for a second." "Thanks to you and our family, I'm finally getting my best friend back," Addison said with a sincere smile. To change the topic a bit, I asked, "And how's your mom doing?" Addison replied, "She's filed for divorce and started therapy. She's finally facing the years of lies she's lived through. She says no one can truly understand that kind of pain unless they've been through it themselves," Hazel added. "It was a real nightmare, but she's strong. With support from work and friends, she'll get through it. Her main goal is to relearn how to trust people. Trust can be hard to rebuild, even with loved ones around," I said. "Sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. For me, that moment was when Addison walked into my office. Thank heaven she did." Victoria, with a playful smile, added, "Samuel made me think I'd be waiting for him forever." Then she turned to the girls and said, "Now let's take a few photos with your father. We need the best shot." When we arrived, Victoria's family greeted us warmly, and her children ran to welcome us, their joy infectious. I watched as my father's face lit up hearing them call me Dad, realizing that Timothy now had 2 older sisters and a younger one, as I once did. Tammy hugged my mother, saying, "I'm so happy you'll be my grandma." I paused to take in all the unexpected joys that had come into my life. Victoria and I agreed to postpone our plans until after the wedding. Trusting her instincts, I left the task of finding a new home to her while I began work on my first novel. My previous projects had focused on uncovering hidden corruption, but this marked a new chapter for me. We stayed closely connected with the twins, and soon Victoria found a beautiful home that needed some remodeling. As Hazel's health improved, she started attending school part-time. We worked with a team on the house project featuring a steel and brick design, an open kitchen, spacious patio, pool, and a 4-car garage. Victoria was able to spend more time at home, allowing me to work closely with my editor on my novel. I wrote this book under my real name, marking my first publication as such. With Violet's approval, she used my lawyer to finalize her divorce from Owen, securing alimony and educational funds. My affairs had reached a standstill, halting at the stage of mediation, as both sides seemed to have exhausted their strength to continue fighting. With the boys and Victoria beside me, I waited for the twins to come home after their last day of school. Timothy was the first to spot them as they drove up our newly renovated driveway. We eagerly stepped outside to greet them. The moment Hazel and Addison got out of the car, I was struck by how quickly Hazel had recovered. She looked so much like Addison that I could hardly tell them apart. "We'll make it through this," Victoria whispered to me soothingly. Like a caring older brother, Timothy took their bags, and Victoria enthusiastically led them to show off our new home. Life in a big family was filled with happiness and joy. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.